So SEO weather, when you look at all the SEO weather tools out there, there's about a dozen providers of SEO weather. What they're generally doing is they're looking at the volatility in rankings for a large number of keywords and URLs. And when they see those rankings are really volatile, they're like, oh, something's going on with Google. There might have been an update. And if that ranking devastation is big enough, they kind of look back and say, yeah, looks like on this date, because of the devastation we see today, we think that this many days back in the past that Google had an update that caused that devastation. And so SEO weather is like reporting on, destroyed homes after a tornado. And if there are enough destroyed homes, we can say, yeah, it kind of looks like a tornado blew through here, or a hurricane, if you will. So these weather systems, they indicate that an update happened in the past by looking at that ranking devastation. It's not an early warning, though. You can't use those systems to say, uh-oh, should I be on the lookout right now? It's kind of after the fact. Like, the homes are already destroyed by the time those systems are alerting to them. Have you guys used any SEO weather systems?
I use SERPWOOS a lot. I like a SERPWOOS, and then on occasion there's the one that Moz has.
Also, I check out Algoroo every once in a while too, in addition to some of the other big ones.
So yeah, there's a couple I didn't even hear of. I pinged people. The Moz one I did, Moz and SEMrush, though, they try to make it so that you can't access their data. Like, they want to share their data, but they encode it in an image and they protect it with Cloudflare, and they deny bots, and they make it really hard to use their data. But some of the other ones make it really easy. They're doing a community service and they're like, here's our data. So if you find these SEO weather systems cool, like I do, you should definitely go and check them out and thank them for providing a community service, because I think all of them are genuinely trying to do a community service. And I think that's a very noble thing. So they should all be applauded for sharing data like this. So one of the things I'm doing in IMG is I'm trying to build a next generation SEO weather system. And part of doing that is I need to figure out what the current weather systems do, how they work, what their limitations are, and what can we do to get predictive. And so here I have 6 weather systems. One of them is the IMG weather system. And you notice they kind of have this stratification where they're at different layers.
Do you have slides?
What's that?
Do you have slides?
Oh, am I not sharing?
Nope.
I
thought we were having an awesome conversation though.
Ted's going for this one.
I was like, yes, no crutch or anything. Boom.
All right. So are you seeing that now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, folks. You don't need to worry because I didn't really have visual aids until this slide, so you didn't miss anything. Okay, so you can see here I have the aggregated and normalized weather from 6 different weather systems. And the green line is the IMG prototype for SEO weather. And you can see that stratification I was mentioning, how it's kind of in layers. And what I think is happening, why the weather systems tend to be in layers that don't show much volatility in their measurement, is that they're seeing the compression of the data by taking averages of large amounts of ranking fluctuations. And when you do that, those averages kind of compress them into straight lines that don't move easily. So if they're looking at 1 million keywords, this is the average volatility of 1 million keywords. And that number is difficult to move up or down. Because
it doesn't really matter that one is at 50 for most of the stuff and one's at 40 and one's at 30. That's just their number, right?
Well, what's so interesting about that is there's probably a very rational reason for why they're at different levels. What they might be doing by taking the average volatility of these rankings is coming up with the average perceived quality of their sample set by Google. So Google thinks that these rank ranger ones aren't as good quality, so they tend to be more volatile in the SERPs, and that's why they're at a 50. So their sample of what they're watching is lower quality than this SERP metrics one, where it's at a lower level. There's less volatility in their sample set. So they're all compressing. That's why they're horizontal bars with very little movement. But what they're actually measuring, because of the way they're doing it, is probably something like, Google's perceived quality of their sample set. And so if I were them, I would probably try to reinvent another way where they can get the volatility of Google's activity back and not compress that data with averages. So like one method, if I was to reinvent how they do it, but keep the spirit of what they're doing, I would pick like all the number 4 results on an epic date. So I'd say, go back in time to this date. Anything that is number 4 in search, we're going to track those and only those. And then we'll get our reading based on that. And I think if they did that and, maybe reduce the amount of averaging that they're doing, reduce the sample set, maybe they'd get a better reading as to when Google is having activity and when they're not.
So just to clarify, what does 0 mean or 10 mean versus 50? What is that? What does that number quantify?
Well, it's a relative indicator of the volatility of rankings for the most part. It's different for us. So most of these services give you a score between 0 and 100 for what the weather is. So it's their weather score. It's kind of like, the artificial scores that you get out of href, like the UR, DR, those types of scores. Oftentimes, they don't really mean anything other than a relative indicator of something. This URL has more, so it's better. This URL has less. This is from day to day. It's an arbitrary score of the volatility of the rankings. And we've normalized all of the scores to a 100-point scale. Some of these services had a 10-point scale instead of a 100-point scale. So we normalize those to be between 0 and 100.
I got it.
That way they all appear. And what we're looking for, since they're relative, is do our peaks match their peaks? Because when we have agreement, then things start to get interesting. So back here on December 25th, we saw activity, and we're doing something different. We're not looking at the fluctuations of rankings. We're looking for the tells that Google has that they're deploying a system. And if there's a whole lot of those tells, we're going, whoa, there's a big deployment going on. And if there's not a lot of those tells, we're like, it doesn't look like Google's propagating stuff out to their servers like we normally see when they announce a giant deployment. So we've collected those tells and we're keeping them secret, but we're reporting on when we see them and when we see a lot of them. And so instead of looking at the average fluctuations and rankings, we're looking at those tells that Google's deploying something on their giant grid of servers. And so back on the 25th, we saw a big event. We were like, whoa, Google's doing something big. And then a few days out, this advanced web rankings weather showed the same spike we showed. So we were like, oh, big thing here. And then they saw the devastation here. We saw a little bit of an uptick on the SERP metrics one too. So they kind of agreed a few days later that something had happened. But you can see how we're trying to get predictive. A few days ahead, we saw the deployment activity. A few days later, we saw, you know, these compressed bumps because they're compressing their data, and it's not very volatile to move the average. But it's interesting that the peaks, we matched some peaks there. And then on the 31st, we saw a big event. And then again, Advanced Web Rankings, their weather saw the big event too, but we saw it a day ahead. So we are predictive in seeing that event. And that's our goal with our system, is we want an early warning. We want to say, hey, people, get ready, look out, you know, go to your basement before the tornado hits you. And we'll go into the things you can do when you have an early warning in a bit. But we just wanted to show the data and help you understand that there are differences in the weather systems. And it's going to be critical going forward to not just use any one, but to use multiple. Because these community services, when you bring all that community service data together, it's kind of magical. And so that's, you know, an important thing that we want to do going forward. And like a bad poker player, Google's updates have numerous tells that they're occurring. Not just one, they have many tells that Google is deploying something. And not only is it just an update, but Google has many types of updates. And we'll go into that too. So how does an early warning help? You know, do big SEO changes like redesigns and domain changes and HTTPS migrations in the, you know, do those types of things in the afternoon in Pacific Standard Time? Because that's what Google's in. Google often has very little to no update activity during those times. And so if we're monitoring for that Google deployment activity and we find zones where they don't do those deployments, that's when you want to do your SEO big actions. So your redesign deployments, your domain changes, your HTTPS migrations. Because if you do your stuff when Google isn't doing their stuff, you know any outcome is more likely to be a result of your work. If you deploy at the same time Google's deploying a big update, you don't know if that outcome is a result of what you did or as a result of the update. So one big thing you can do is not do big actions while Google is doing big actions. Another thing you can do, if you know that Google's doing a big update and say you're an online retailer, you can go, oh no, I don't know if my rankings are going to fall from this big update. I can take protective measures for my revenue and increase budget in pay-per-click. That way, if there's any, you know, chance of losing revenue from organic, I can offset it. So if I know I'm going to have trouble making payroll and I see Google's doing something big and I get hit hard with Google updates every time they happen, I can mitigate that revenue loss by investing in a different marketing channel until I see the fallout. So, you know, there's things you can do if you're often hit by updates, but your life depends on the revenue you make. You can also pay closer attention and manage expectations better. You know, it's really bad to, in front of a client, be caught off guard. and the client's saying, why did my rankings fall? And you happen to say after the fact, well, we think there was an update. It's much better if you can get to a point where you can say, hey, we might see some volatility. We think there's a big Google deployment happening right now. Then that volatility happens, and then you look like an SEO god for predicting so you want to manage those expectations, and then you can say, hey, I told you up front that those ranking losses, might happen this week, and then they did. That wasn't from our SEO, that was an update, but we can help recover. We can figure out what's going on and try to adapt. So that's another way early warnings can help. Any thoughts on using early warnings?
Well, I think one of the big things that you've got, Ted, is people often give ranking reports to their clients, and they happen on a specific time when that report is generated, in whatever tool you're using. They look a little weird, or you can look at like how the things are going, how the update predictor is working, and be like, you know what, let's wait one day. Let's let things settle down a little bit instead of sending a report when things are in flux, and who knows what that report's going to look like. And it's not going to be indicative of the work you're actually doing.
Yeah, exactly. The more you can eliminate that confusion and variance, the better. And the better that you're able to explain those events, saying, we don't think this outcome is a result of our SEO. We think it's Google's update activity. We think we should wait a week or two and then take a measurement. That's an important thing.
I think plus being able to give your clients a heads up like that is it's a value added for them, and they have, and more importantly, they have more trust in you, and they know that you're on top of it and you're paying attention and you know what you're doing, versus the normal guy or gal or agency that is not tracking it that closely. It's kind of like waiting for the tornado to hit versus someone who's in advance, like you said, to use that analogy.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be the SEO that only knows about the Google update after it's destroyed your home. That's a bad position to be in. So I mentioned that there are types of updates, and in really researching SEO Weather, I've really come to understand that there are different types of updates, and these weather systems are largely blind to all of them. So another thing that we're looking is trying to broaden our understanding of the types of activity that Google is updating. And so there are algorithm updates, and these affect which factors influence your rankings for a keyword. Those examples of those would be like panda, penguin, medic. There are meta blending updates, because a lot of people still don't understand that Google is a meta search engine. They're actually multiple search engines, and they're blending the results for your keyword search together. And they can alter the mix of those outputs. And so some of what they're mixing is local, organic, ad search, knowledge graph, shopping, image, videos, news, related search, people also ask, and other things. An example of one of those meta blending updates is when Google changed page 1 and it went from 10 organic results to 9. And most of the world didn't even know that Google took away 10% of their page 1 rankings. They instantly went to page 2 when Google did that in the meta blend. But that's an example of an update to the meta blend, and we should be watching for those. Query intent updates. These are things like Instant, BERT, Rank Brain. These are how Google understands your query and better utilizes cache, how they interpret what your query means and what they should do in response to that intention. But those aren't changing the factors of how Google ranks your page. That's changing how Google understands the searcher's query. So that's a different type of update than one that would potentially make you rank 6 places lower. There are HTML updates, and these are when Google changes the HTML of the search result page. And they often do split tests on the formatting of how these pages look. And those changes oftentimes can break SEO tools. They're notorious for breaking rank trackers. And so Google will do an HTML update, and all of a sudden a bunch of people go, oh no, all my rankings just fell through the floor. Well, they didn't actually change it all. It just broke the parsing in their rank tracker, and they thought that all their rankings fell. And if you go and manually spot check your rankings, you'll see, oh, nothing actually changed. My rank tracker got unreliable because Google did an HTML update, or Google's doing split testing. And if I retest my rankings, they'll come back. And if I retest them again, I'll get the B split test and they'll drop. And so there are these HTML updates too. And then there are process updates, and these affect the timing and scope of Google's data processing. And Caffeine and Mayday and the Google Search Console updates, and PageRank going from quarterly to batch processing to continuous processing. Those are examples of process updates, and they affect the timing of when Google does things behind the scenes that could impact your rankings. And so these are like the types of updates we've come to understand. And so the SEO weather tools out there, they don't indicate all these different types of updates. And so we want to move in a direction where we understand all of this type of activity and how it impacts, our SEO. And so we're still in the early days of that, but it's important to understand there's not one algorithm. There's not one type of Google update. There's many types. And some of them, unfortunately, are a lot easier to detect than others. So I wish I could say that we could detect them all. I think a lot of them, most of them, we will eventually be able to detect and report on. But some of them are going to be a lot harder to report on than others.